Well, welcome to Crossroads, a casual conversation with pastors and friends where we explore the intersection and particularly the confrontation of our faith as Christians with the culture of this world. I'm Michael John, the pastor of the Market Street Baptist Church right here in Amesbury, and joining me today is Dave Hammer, pastor of the Danville Baptist Church, and Rick Harrington, pastor of First Baptist Church in Haverhill.
Michael.
Welcome, men.
Good to see
Welcome
you guys.
Back. Our first Crossroads of the year. This is recording January 5th, 2024. Happy New Year, everyone. And as you know, every time, about this time of year, we have the presidents will usually give the State of the Union address to the nation, speaking in January, usually of the year, about how the country is doing, the challenges we're facing, and the plans that we might have moving forward. Of course, you know, in politics, it's not particularly honest. It's usually slanted to try to make the president and the administration look as good as possible. But you know, we are not going to go in that direction. We're going to have a little bit of state of the American church, we'll call this. So the state of the American church discussion, and since we're not politicians, we will try to be honest and maybe a little depressing, maybe a little concerning. We'll see how things go today. So again, our goal is not to push any particular agenda, but to reflect on the state of the church in America. Where are we? What are the challenges that might be ahead for us? So I want to start with some depressing statistics here, shall we call them. This is from a book that you've recommended, Rick, The Great Dechurching. And here are some of the statistics that you've sent my way here, and they seem to be probably accurate. Apparently, in the last 25 years, 40 million Americans have left the church. 40 million Americans have left the church.
Keep in mind, there's only 330-something million Americans, period.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a lot. Between 2020 and 2021, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptists, Rick and I, we are Southern Baptists, but it's the largest Protestant denomination in the country, lost nearly 410,000 members. That's the largest single year loss in the 170 years of the SBC.
Yep. Wow.
In 2000, the average church attendance of a local church, if you went to a local church, you could expect, maybe not so much here in New England, but around the country, an average attendance of about 137 in 2000. In 2020, the average weekly church attendance at a local church was 65. Now that's a remarkable drop.
Yep.
That's over half. Okay. We also have some other statistics. This is from Tom Rayner, churchanswers.com. That average worship attendance, 31% of all churches are under 50 in attendance. Between 50 and 100, another 37%, 24% are over 100 to 249, and then only 8% are about 250 and above. So if you have 250 attendees of your church, you are considered now a very large church. That overall does not sound good. It sounds very bad. And so first question I want to ask is, how do we get here? What's happening? Why is there such a significant decline in church attendance in America over the last 20 years? So I'll throw it out there, you guys. Dave, Rick, where do we start? What happened?
You know, the answer to this question, how did we get here, is a lot like saying, you know, what are the forces that made the modern world? So there's a variety of things. You know, I think there was a time early on in my education where I would have thought it's primarily the history of thought, and so in the last 300 years. Theism has fallen out of favor philosophically, and so you could trace the history of philosophy, but that is very much intertwined with changes in science and technology, for example. Just one example, so the invention of the printing press.
Okay.
When there was, when a lot less people, when hardly any people had a public voice, it was easier for authority to be concentrated in a very few. But as that number has grown from the printing press to Twitter, and there's a cacophony of voices, the idea that there is one supreme authority, I mean, not only does it seem maybe unjust, but it also seems implausible in a world where there's so many voices. So, that's just the tip of the iceberg there.
So you're thinking that there's, would you call it secularism here? Just sort of there is this there's a real questioning of authority in the world, and you're no longer really looking to the church to provide answers.
Yep.
You have so many other options to seek now
Yeah.
for answers to this world. What do you think about this?
Yeah, just in agreement too what Dave said. There's no magic bullet. There's no one explanation. You know, we're talking about major forces over a long period of time, and it isn't just that it happened in the last 5 years. This is something that's been happening for a long time. So I think I would almost break it down into what happened inside the church that kind of led to this, and forces outside the church. You know, forces outside the church would be the shifting culture, the rise of pluralism and those type of things. And inside the church, there's a lot of factors, and that's kind of more interesting to me, because it's what have we done to get to this point, and therefore what can we do differently going forward. But I think you certainly could point to things like the Catholic sex abuse scandal was a huge part of this. That obviously was found in Protestant churches as well. A sort of lack of discipleship, a kind of celebrity pastor, an emphasis on numerical growth in these big sort of showy churches that didn't have any depth to them. So there's a lot of factors in the church that I think would actually lead to this too.
All right, well, let's break this down a little bit then. Let's talk about, when we want to start with the factors within the church, we can also say, what are the factors in America that, what's changed with Americans so that church attendance is no longer valued? So I remember growing up, and I don't know if it was just my family particularly, but I suspect there were more like that to do anything other than going to church on a Sunday morning was unthinkable. It was not up for debate. There was no question. Getting up in the morning, unless I was sick, I'm going to church. I'm going to Sunday school. It doesn't matter if I have baseball practice, or in fact there wasn't that much competing with church in the mornings here. But now I can see where there's a lot more going on Sunday mornings than there used to be. So what happened here? What's changed with the American culture so that the church attendance is no longer valued? And by that I mean by Christians. So we can talk about the secular people of the age who don't believe and have no interest. But what about all the people out there who still identify as Christians but don't go to church? And there's a lot of them. What's happened? Why do they no longer value church? Either of you can jump in on that one here.
One way to think about it is I think that cultural changes accrue in a similar way that compound interest accrues, which is a little bit at first and then more and more over time. And so, for example, let's just take the example of Sunday morning sports. Well, when there was no one that was available, so there's first of all, there's blue laws, and there's no Sunday, things can't even be open on Sundays. When that's removed, the removal of a law, that teaches something. You know, that teaches that is permissible to do other things on Sunday. And then as more and more people get available, then they join in Sunday morning sports, and then, but that's not like the end point. Now that's an option for even church-going families. And so, you know, the number going to church keeps decreasing, and those doing other things increase. So that's just like, that's one little issue in that.
Interesting.
I think too, we've talked about this on this show before, is the devaluing the importance of gathering together. And again, this is one of those things where it's hard, you're chasing in a circle cause and effect. I mean, which one, is this what happens when we lack discipleship, or is this the cause of the lack of discipleship? But certainly the idea that gathering together is not that important. That sort of idea, which was strongly emphasized during COVID, right? And so that kind of really sped up this process. But that that how we go about the Christian life outside of our gatherings is more important than our gatherings. That mentality has been emphasized. So what eventually happens, of course, is people say, well, I don't need to go to church on Sunday. It's not about the gathering. So you'll hear terms like, I'm more spiritual than religious. Things that are more traditional, like going to a church and sitting through a service, is seen as more religious and therefore less important, but I'm more of a spiritual person, so things like meditation or whatever becomes more emphasized. And again, is that the effect or the cause? It's hard to know, but
It is gathering that important? I mean, we're lamenting the state of the church, and we're lamenting the fact that church attendance has dropped so much, but then we have to ask, well, so what? I mean, didn't George Barna write a book about sort of the revolution, so that there's going to be a new way of Christianity. We're going to be getting our spiritual fiber coming from online stuff. So if you want to grow as a Christian, you can go online. You can watch 1 million great sermons on YouTube or anywhere you want, any kind you want. Music, you can go listen to great worship music of all kinds, far better than anything in our church. You know, the sermons are far better than I could preach. And so you get the best quality online like this. Why is it such a big deal if I just pursue my faith at home and not, why do I need to go to church?
You know, we're embodied beings. You know, we're not, our bodies are not one separate part of us, like our mind is, or our spirit's what really matters. No, our mind and our body are one thing. And when you read the Bible, you see that worshiping together, basically sharing your life with the Christians that live around you, is part of the Christian life. And to go back in my you know, you asked why this changed so much in the last 20 years, but I think all of it is a continuum with history. And so you just think about when my town of Danville, New Hampshire was formed. It was formed because it was hard for the people that lived there to make it the distance to Kingston, New Hampshire, where the church building was. And so they petitioned ultimately the King of England to create this new area that was called Danville. Well, it was originally called Hawk, because they wanted to worship closer to home. Now, as cars are invented, so that you fast forward to a couple hundred years, you can go to the church that suits your lifestyle or your preferences more. And what that does, in effect, is it kind of chips away at the biblical ideal of shared life together. You know, we're starting to go into my preferences trump what the Bible's vision, and we're just further down that road now.
Okay. So as Americans, we're kind of in that, maybe would you call it a consumeristic mentality? We're seeking, if it's inconvenient, and maybe you mentioned a little bit how the church maybe played into that.
Absolutely.
You might add a little bit more to that.
Oh yeah. So the idea that a church, instead of being a family, a spiritual family, necessary, like where you are shepherded by a person, by a group of people
who you know,
who know you. Who know your struggles and your sins and your, you know, all your gifts, and instead it kind of moved towards, hey, well, we can get bigger numerically if we kind of give people what they want. We put on the show that they really like, and then the church with the biggest show and the best show in town wins, right? And so that was happening a lot with these large megachurches, and I'm not anti-megachurch entirely, but a lot of these churches were actually just taking people from other churches who said, hey, the show's better here. And that built that whole sort of kind of more of a consumer attitude. What has the best children's program? What has the best ministry for my teens? And I understand that that's based on a parental desire to care for their kids. But what ends up happening is you just jump from church to church, finding the one that appeals most to your desires and needs. Well, eventually, like you said, you're going to find a better preacher on TV or online. You're going to find better worship, you know, on YouTube. And so it just becomes sort of like, well, I don't need this anymore. It's not my family. It's not my spiritual family that I'm tied to. But I just wanted to say, before I lose a thought, there is a balance, of course, and that we would say that gathering isn't everything. So, so we don't want to say that all that matters is that you get together with your church on Sunday, Sunday night, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. There is the living out daily and going in your workplace and in your home with your family devotionals and, you know, with your friends. So there is that balance, that's for sure. I just think we've swung now to the other side, which we've devalued meeting together as if it has no value at all, really.
So we might say it's not everything, but it's not nothing.
It's not nothing.
You know, my grandmother was very much passionate about you being in church. Beyond that, it didn't matter how you live your life, as long as you're in church on Sunday. And we'd say, okay, well, that's not right. We should really live out the Christian faith. But she was right. We should be in church. It should be a part of that. And the Bible does talk about that, doesn't it, in Hebrews, about do not neglect the gathering of yourselves together. And then it says, very interesting, as some are in the habit of doing, that it becomes a habit to stay away. I want to comment a little bit more on the consumer thing of where the church is appealing to the felt needs of the congregants, and the congregation becomes the customers, and we want to make the customers happy, and so we appeal to them. And so the question becomes: is you should come to church because it's good for you, or it can be beneficial to you. Now, at some point, that Christian might feel like I don't really need this. It's not really that beneficial. Again, I can get my sermons online, I can read my Bible, I can pray, I can do all that stuff outside the church. And to be honest with you, it's kind of a hassle.
Yep.
And why would I want to be involved in a church and be in committees? I mean, in the politics and all the bickering and stuff like that. I feel much more spiritual and holy when I stay away from the church.
Yeah.
However, it's not a business, is it? It's a family, and it's not just that you need to come to church, or you should come to church because it's good for you, but rather we need you. There's a sense of we need each other. You're withholding things from that. You might be doing great, good for you, but there are others in the church who need your ministry and that connection with you that you're withholding from one another too.
Yeah.
I mentioned before we began about there's a church that declared last Sunday Sabbatical Sunday. It was December 31st, and it was a strange way to phrase it, Sabbatical Sunday, basically meaning you don't have to go to church. There's no church this Sunday. Because there's a storm coming? No. Weather's fine. Because there's something else going on that week? No. It's just, you know what, we're all could use a little break. We're a little tired, and we could use a little break. So, again, the church is like a business, and so we want to give people a break, which is, now that leads to this question of, like, not only is church attendance not valued by Americans, and not only is it not valued by Christians, it's not even valued by pastors and churches anymore.
Absolutely.
So,
and just anecdotally, compare that to like Christians meeting under the ground in the catacombs in Rome at the risk of their lives. Or I was in China a few years back before 2020, and these house churches. Most of the Christians in China are part of these house churches that are underground, meaning that they fly below the radar of the government, and people will break in and arrest the pastor, and that stuff happens all the time. So at the risk of their own safety and at the risk of incarceration, they're saying meeting together as Christians is so important. And even in other places, at the risk of our lives, that we will absolutely, that these more, let's say, radical Muslims, we're going to meet even still at the risk of losing our lives if we get caught. And yet we're kind of like you said, it's like, well, we're kind of tired. Let's just take the Sunday off. Right?
Now think about how that commitment to meeting together, how that, it doesn't just mean there's going to be better church attendance. Like, well, we have more consistent attendance because we're really committed. But when you're that committed, and you love each other in the way that, say, they do in a Chinese illegal house church, then as people encounter you, they encounter relationships that they don't encounter other places. Now, as people come to an average American church where the people maybe are really born again believers, but are also quite consumeristic, individualistic, like all their neighbors, they don't really share their lives with other believers. And so maybe the people are nice, maybe they're friendly, but they also likely don't share a kind of relationship that's palpably different than at another club in town. And so the church loses something. There's a certain attractiveness, a certain spiritual vitality that maybe isn't there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, I want to talk about COVID. Things changed dramatically in 2020. What happened with that? Do you think the pandemic made a huge difference in now these results are, I'm looking at these, and it was like 2000 to 2020, so that's kind of right before COVID, or right around the time when COVID began. But how do you, and then 2020, 2021, the SBC losing 410,000 members in that time. Do you think COVID had anything to do with all this?
I think that COVID, when you mention COVID, it relates to, of course, the disease and the shutdowns and all that. But a lot came out of that, including the riots, which really emphasized the racial divide in our country, and that whole, what's sometimes called BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and that has really divided the church. I think, if I remember correct, the largest group de-churching ethnically is Asian. So this was kind of surprising, right? So, so there's that. The economic changes that came with COVID that really shaped things. So a lot is related to COVID that I think affect us. Certainly the the rise in LGBTQ and how that's affected. So churches not moving with the culture there has caused a lot of the de-churching as well.
So a lot of I'm curious about the Asian thing, but so with the LGBTQ and the woke, sort of the progressive agenda that's being really, seems to be captivating the young people, particularly the young women. It seems to be most captivated by that, because that's what I've noticed in our own churches. Like there's definitely a great decline in young women in the church and their relationship to the church, whereas the young men are actually kind of coming around a little bit more. But the Asian question there, any explanation for that?
I mean, this would only be my best attempt at an explanation. Is that the older Asians, and I'm Asian, so I got to, kind of came from this first generation immigrant. Like we got to provide this kind of mentality, and then the younger Asians tend to be more influenced by the kind of the woke culture, and are seeing Christianity in a different light, the church in a different light. They're seeing it as more colonizing and that kind of thing, and they're kind of going with the flow. Very different than their Asian predecessors who see Christianity and their sort of pursuit of the American dream in some ways as two positive goods, and two good things that are positive. So that's my best guess, is that the younger the Asian you talk to, typically, now there's plenty of exceptions in this, but the more they'd be influenced by the woke kind of idea. So, and that whole people of color, that whole thing. So it's been a huge part of the de-churching. People see the church as homophobic, bigoted, stuck in there, not willing to change, and then when in reality everything else has changed so quickly. Gender issues, and the church just kind of remains where it was, and that's been a big issue too. So
Dave, do you have any observations on COVID? What do you think about that?
I had heard some have said that COVID, that period of time, couple of years, seemed to accelerate cultural forces which were already at work. So I see that. I'm not exactly sure what that dynamic was. But I do know, those were cultural forces which were not, on the whole, great for the church. Basically the increasing secularization of our culture. But as far as how the dynamics worked, I'm not sure. But we did see that in our church. We saw a significant decline in attendance, so that at the end of COVID, we were by far the lowest attendance that we've had in my 15 years there.
And were the people still tuning in online now, or were they just dropping out altogether?
Not watching online, different things. Some going to different churches, some dropping out.
I want to get, we can talk about the statistics, and it's hard to interpret statistics on a grand scale. It's hard to understand your own situation. So, but we've been in New England for quite some time. I know I've been serving at my church since '98. Rick, when did you start serving at your church?
So I to be about 20 years ago. So
20 years ago.
2003, 4.
And Dave, you've been serving in ministry for quite some time.
15 years,
15 years at your church. Before that, you were serving another place?
Somewhere else, Spokane, Washington.
Okay. So, but you've been in ministry for how long total, would you say?
18 years.
Okay. All right. So we're all kind of around that 20-year period here. So we've seen, in our own experience, we know what it was like in the 2000s or early 2000s and compared to today. So, have you, in your observations, in your experience, experienced the same decline in church attendance that we just discussed with these numbers here? Have you seen that in your own personal experience? And if you have, what do you see? Because now we're in New England, which is very different from the rest of the country too.
So I would say yes, but that's not the whole story, and I think maybe we'll get more to this later.
Yeah.
I feel like the church is stronger and healthier than maybe it ever has been since I've been there, but attendance has declined. There were a lot more, when I was, I would say 20 years ago, there were a lot more people who came, kind of Sunday morning folks, and that was their church. They showed up on Sunday. You might not see them in a Bible study or anything else afterwards, but they will be there. And that dynamic is changing, and so I would say, and I think just statistically, we have lost, we have gone down in attendance.
Yeah. How about you?
Well, I was just going to say, I can remember it was probably about 20 years ago, hearing a talk by a well-known Christian speaker, and he was saying how the church in Europe has declined dramatically, but thankfully, and people expected that to have happened in America too at that point, and how it really hadn't. But now I think he'd say, it is happening, or it has happened, and And yeah, I mean, I do see that. And so if you're, I mean, I think that my children, who are 3 teenagers and 1 in middle school, there's a lot of things that they believe that they won't say in church. I mean, in school, public school, and I'm just not sure that really was happened before. So I think that's one kind of, you know.
Yeah, I've seen a definite decline in families. That's for sure. You know, the attendance is probably similar to what it was before, maybe even a little bit more, but not a lot more. But most of the people that come to our church now come by themselves. They are the only ones in their family who believe, or they're widows or divorcees and singles. And it's we don't have many full intact families who come on a regular basis, and it's hard to say why that would be the case. Sometimes it's just the stage that your particular local church is in. But there does seem to be a resistance to it, and I don't know if it was COVID that got some of our families just to get out of the habit of coming, and then once teenagers get out of the habit of anything, forget it. It's over, you know. Or again, with the woke agenda, there's this resistance. There feels to be more of an animosity toward the church than in the past. In the past, I mean, the biggest concern you'd have is that people didn't care or just weren't interested. Now it's almost like, wow, there's a lot of people who really feel a special contempt and hatred toward the church, not just, I don't care. And coming down to a lot of it is we've been slandered as homophobic and transphobic and bigoted and racist and all these other isms as well. So, New Englanders, let's talk about that. What's happening? What do you see happening in New England as in relationship to the church, in the culture? Is New England going the same way as the rest of the country is?
I would say that the rest of the country is going in the same way that New England is. And what I mean by that is that New England tends to be a little bit ahead of the curve. What happens here, but probably a lot due to the universities, and the fact that you have the biggest, you have New York and Boston and New England. I know New York's not in Boston, but in New England, but it's close. Sort of are the most cutting edge culturally, and then the rest of the country tends to follow a little bit behind that. So I think we were already there before the rest of the country got there. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think, Dave?
I would just add to that is that while it's discouraging to see churches shrink, and New England churches lead the way in a lot of ways in being some of the smaller churches, at least some of other states. What I think you also see very vibrant Christianity here. You wish it was more people, but the churches, I mean, I think about just the churches in the towns that surround us in New Hampshire, and I moved here from Washington State, and I read that New Hampshire, Vermont are the 2 least church-going states in the country, and I was pleased from the time I got here to find that every town, at least surrounding us here in southeastern New Hampshire, have not just churches, but Bible preaching churches, and a lot of them with pastors that have been there longer than 10 years. So that's really positive.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is what I'm most excited about talking about is the fact that spiritually, I think this is this is the heyday of my ministry so far. I think that the spiritual depth and maturity is unlike we've seen before. So I think that type of opposition and that type of refining or pruning, however you want to look at it, has actually made it so that those who are there, so before you might come to church because it might be socially advantageous to you. You meet some people there, it's good. Some people it may be good for business, or you just, it's a socially acceptable and a socially maybe fun thing to do. Not the case anymore. It's kind of a strange thing to do. And particularly here in New England, to go to a Protestant or Baptist church is even a little bit more strange. So those who are there really want to be there. And one of the ways we see this is, as I started to mention, it's those who attend on Sundays and attend a weekly Bible study is extremely high, higher than I think it's ever been. That there's an interest in being involved in more than just Sunday morning now. So it has done something to the church in that it's like I said, in New England, we've been seeing this decline for a long time. But if what we're seeing now is any sign for the rest of the country, that's a good sign, actually, because these are good days, I think.
So. All right, this is a strange conversation right now. We're supposed to be depressed, This is supposed to be in despair here.
Yeah.
We've just given you the numbers here, guys. Let's face the reality. We're doomed, aren't we? We're doomed. I mean, the church is just declining. It's been in free fall. Attendance has dropped dramatically in half, and nothing in our own observations have confirmed that too. People are getting out of the habit. If they're, even the Christians are not interested, even the churches are not interested. I mean, everyone's just tired. It feels like public school at the end of the year. Everyone wants to go home, right? Even the teachers want to go home. They don't want to be there. And yet you, both of you, sound a little bit encouraged here. You sound like something is going on here, and I want to explore that a little bit more. You talked about how that people who are coming to Bible studies along with worship has increased. Has that been the case for you too?
Yeah, we have a very good number involved in midweek Bible study and coming to,
So the number of people who are coming, so you would say maybe in the past there would be more people in the pews on a Sunday, but actually fewer people coming for the midweek studies of the Word, that they weren't as serious or as intense about their faith.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it isn't even just a statistic thing here. I mean, it's just, you can feel it. You can talk to people, and how the type of questions, the type of the desire, they want to learn, they want to grow deeper. They want their roots to be deeper now. And I just sense that from the membership of the church is serious about their faith now. Like, they don't want the fluff. They don't want a big show. They want you to feed them the Word. They want to really truly worship. They want to be prepared and equipped. And again, it's almost you can sense it more than you can see it. So,
why do you think that is? Why are you guys just doing so much a better job now than you did before? What's going on?
I don't know, but you wonder if it's because they feel more of a distinction between them and their unbelieving family and neighbors, and so in some way that makes their faith feel more real or more significant or something like that. So I don't know, but there does seem to be some dynamic.
Going back to China, for example, one pastor we spoke to, house church pastor, said his prayer was that God not remove the persecution yet. And his explanation was, he said, I don't feel like we're ready yet. We haven't matured enough yet. So if God takes away the persecution and we get comfortable now, we're gonna be in trouble. We need that.
Wow.
And so I think that the church tends to thrive when it isn't comfortable, and you have to fight for your faith, and you have to understand your faith, because not everyone around you is going to share that faith. So I think what we're seeing is that okay, if you're a Christian now, it's because you really want to be one. You really have to understand what the gospel's really all about. It isn't just, no, I go to church because I believe in a general sense of God. It's, I really believe this now. There's no social benefit to go, there's not like it was before, unless I really want this. So,
Okay.
How about you, Michael? I mean, you're the host, but I think I'd like to hear what you have to say on this one.
Yeah, no, I've had similar experiences. I think we've had, I know in the past, we would have, midweek, we'd have a midweek Bible study, and it was the same, half a dozen people so would come, and it was, it was okay. It was nothing to write home about, not that. But of late, of the last several years, I do 3 Bible studies during the week, and one of them I do online, but the other 2 I've been averaging over 15 each time. One for men, one for women, and they're very engaged and very in tune, and it's been really interesting. I mean, it's been really exciting to see that. That hunger for the Word is definitely there. Yeah. COVID was interesting. I have mixed feelings about the whole pandemic thing, because on the one hand, it forced us to go online. We had to have an online presence on Facebook and then on Zoom. But that also opened up, and it was frustrating in one sense, because it did allow some of our people to just say, hey, I can just sleep in and just watch it online. And we have lost several families to the internet. They still tune in. I'll still see them putting checks and likes and loves on the Facebook page, which is nice. I'm glad that they're tuning in. But some can't be there, but many of them could be there, and they choose not to, for whatever reason, I don't know. And that's a little frustrating. However, it has allowed us to bring our services to people who were completely shut off before, shut-ins, who were unable to be there. So that's been interesting, and then to do Bible studies so that's much more accessible. There's definitely there is definitely a hunger, and it feels like it feels like the Marines, like being a band of brothers in hostile territory. It's like there's a real bond. It's very vibrant. I love it. I absolutely love it. I love being in New England. I couldn't bear being a pastor in the Bible Belt where everything is Christian around me, and it just doesn't. There's a certain joy in the battle that we face together, and it is an encouraging thing to see. So, I've definitely seen I would say for us it's been 3 things that are really standing out. Is a hunger for the Word has been higher than I've ever seen. That's no question about that. And again, church attendance is basically roughly the same. Different faces in the pews, but it's roughly the same. Prayer has been big, really big in our church. We've got a group that between 6 and 12, I'm not even sure how many go, but every morning on Zoom they meet for prayer, and they pray every day, Monday through Friday. I'm not a part of that. That's something on their own. And then we have various groups to gather prayer, and we do that, and it's been well received. And then third is the fellowship has been really, really sweet and very tight. And I think a lot is because in our context, like I said, most of our people come alone. And for them, the church is their family, which we've had this discussion before, which is why it drives me crazy when churches cancel for no reason, because maybe the Sunday falls on a particular day, or it's a low Sunday, and they just kind of cancel a service. I'm like, this is family. You know, it's how frustrating and discouraging it is when I have a chance to gather with family and then it's just called off and I have to stay home alone. It's like for our people if you have a family, that might be nice. You can stay home with your family. But if you don't, you know, the church is that. And I think we're seeing more of that, where the church is, we are like this band of brothers, this island of misfit toys. You can call it that too, if you wish, where we're just finding that fellowship with each other that is particularly sweet. So. Well, I want to take a little bit of time at the end here to ask the question is, okay, we've kind of laid out a little bit of the state of the church here. And, you know, one of the questions I'd asked before we began was, the church, there's no doubt the church is declining in numbers. It's undeniable, that's fine. But is that a bad thing? Is that decline a sign that we're dying and our days are numbered and the church will be irrelevant or gone in the near future? Or is it a pruning in which we are smaller but we're healthier and we're poised for a rebound and growth, a good growth, not a fluff and a faddish type of growth that pops and leaves? What's your take on that? I suspect, I know where we might answer that, but let's just say dying or pruning. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, every challenge you face, whether it's an individual or the church, is a chance to grow. Is being pruned. And in fact, I'd say maybe how we respond to the challenge might determine how we might label it later on, looking back.
Yeah.
You know, if we just mope around and regret that we're dying, well, then that is where we're headed.
Okay.
But you can grow. You know, in a hospital bed, you can grow anywhere. The more you turn to Christ. So,
and I would say similarly that, I mean, in some ways we grieve over the fact that 40 million people have left the church because we missed an opportunity. You know, that we could have discipled that better. As a church, so looking at inward and saying, what a shame that we at one point had that many people attending churches and that we lost them partly due to our own fault, right? So that certainly is a grievous thing, and that there's a death there that is not to be celebrated. But at the same time, what is God doing in the midst of this in His grace? I think He is pruning or in refining. Yeah. I remember they did a study, I think it was in 2020, so right before COVID, called the Faith Communities Today study, and it showed it's similar to what we just read. Everything is declining. I mean, just almost every statistic shows the church losing ground and losing people. But there were 2 areas that the study showed a change in the positive. One of them was people's perspective of their church. So whether you believe your church was a good, healthy church, whether you believe your church was not, or whatever, people had a more positive attitude towards their church than they've had in the past. And the other was giving, which I think is interesting because they're both factors of depth of discipleship, not of numerical growth, right? So it's by giving, not the amount an individual per person would give. So people on average were giving more to their church. And it's not about, again, I'm not trying to say it's all about the money. I'm saying that shows a deeper commitment to discipleship. So the factors that show a depth of faith were growing. The factors that showed the numerical size of the church were declining quickly. So pruning.
Fewer people, but those people were much more invested in the local church. They clearly felt positive about it. And you're right, where your treasure is, there your heart is.
Also, yes.
That reveals that.
Yeah.
Where do we go from here? Whatever the situation is, our aim is similar. We want to see. I think any sincere pastor, any sincere Christian would say, look, we want to see the church grow in a healthy way. We don't want to be bloated with just big numbers but really growing disciples and people fully committed to Christ, but have more of those. So great, we've got a small number who are more committed. Can we make that number larger? Can we get a larger number who are now more committed and really have a healthier, larger, more vibrant church? So if you're thinking about, if you're like a bodybuilder, let's just say, all right, it's a good thing we might be losing weight, losing our fat, but can we gain some muscle now? So where do we need to go from here? If there are there changes that you would like to see in the church, maybe in even your own church or just the church at large, that you would like to see moving forward to get us to a place where we're really more faithful, healthier, and more effective witnesses for Christ in this world? What are some areas that you would love to see change or develop or grow?
I guess one way to say it would be that I think the church should look at getting better at being the church. Like it would be really the wrong move to think, that the culture's changing. What changes do we need to make to match where they're going? I think that'd be wrong. So I think we need to press in on who does Jesus call us to be? How does the Bible describe us? And embrace whether it may be very countercultural. It probably will be. But I think that's what will make our beauty stand out and be attractive. Now, having said that, I think there is a place too for seeing ways that, we could put in terms of ways that we've been failing in the last couple decades, but let me put it like this. We could say a lot of the ways that our culture is changing for the worse, is becoming more secular and anti-Christian, let's say. How have those trends impacted us and made us worse Christians, with like individualism, consumerism, stuff like that? So those also would be worth
Can you take a specific example of an area where we really need to reform as Christians or as the church at large? You said anything specific that comes to mind for you where we need to be less like the world?
Yeah, I think those two things I just mentioned, individualism and consumerism. So I think one way that we're a lot like the world is, picking and choosing the activities and even the church that we want to be a part of based on our own demographics or interests, and shutting off part of our lives. Like for example, the Bible says a lot about hospitality. How are Christians today at hospitality? I suspect they're not very good. And I think that's very much related to individualism. I think hospitality in America has probably gone down. I bet the church's hospitality, having people into our homes specifically, has probably gone down at the same rate that it's gone down in the culture at large. So that'd just be one example.
That's an interesting example, a very interesting example, because that clearly is highly valued in the Bible, hospitality. It tells all of them to practice hospitality. And even the elders of the church have to be hospitable if they're going to serve as pastors. It sets the tone for them. That's interesting. What about you, Rick? What are your thoughts on that?
I think maybe a word for pastors, and then word for in church leaders, and then one for the church overall. And that if pastors need to stop trying to be celebrity pastors. Stop trying to put on a show and be individually standing out as a pastor, and just be a faithful shepherd. That's your job. That's your calling. You want to be famous, go do something else, or be famous in another area of life. But as far as being a pastor, just be a good, faithful shepherd, obedient to the word, love your people, take care of them, guide them to glory, and that's your job. Get about that job. And I think that is happening. And I think you see it more here in New England, because you don't hear about celebrity pastors here. Even if you hear about a pastor who's famous and rich, you kind of cringe at the very idea of it, right? Yeah. That's going to happen with the rest of the country coming. I think they're going to be tired of this whole showiness of pastors. And similarly, not grabbing a hold of the latest fad. This book will radically change your church. This new method, this new program, this new sort of best-selling book is what you need to everyone to read, instead of just going to the ordinary means of grace of faithfully preaching, teaching the word, loving people, prayer. Again, that commitment to pray. It's kind of worked for 2,000 years, around the world, and so I think that's extremely important. And then I think, as a whole, for the church to know how to engage, it's particularly teaching the next generation how to engage other beliefs, because we're in a pluralistic society, unlike we've seen before. So what happened before, I think, a lot of people didn't have to be challenged in their faith. Kids were sent off to college, and then they meet people of all different beliefs, and they say, I don't know if I believe in the Christian faith anymore. They've never had to experience that sort of interaction with people of different beliefs. And I think, and that speaks to the lack of good discipleship within local churches. So those are two areas I'd like to see the church grow and continue in.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, I'm with you on both those ideas. And for me, it's like I see it's, tending to the foundation. We can talk about evangelism, you can talk about missions and doing all the outreach stuff. And if you think about it as hospitality, it's you don't invite people over your home until your home is cleaned up. Let's clean up our place here a little bit. And one of the things I feel like we've kind of lost our way, especially as Baptists, and I think it's a Baptist thing particularly. There has been a sense, and with the church growth movement from back, I don't know, was it the 70s, 60s, 70s, whenever that really began, there has been this sense that whatever works we can do, that there is we can do whatever we want with that Sunday morning as we gather together, throw some music together, have a nice talk, and just we can entertain people, throw skits, you can do all kinds of crazy things and whatever it takes. And some of these mega churches where they actually have zip lines for the pastor to come zipping into the pulpit and he can make a big show, and who doesn't want to see that? That's fun stuff, right? But rather saying, okay, what is it that is required of us in worship that we must be attending to? And I think Acts 2:42 is a helpful starting point. Where the first church, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to the fellowship, to the prayers, to the breaking of bread. And that whole getting back to the very basics of, look, are we preaching the gospel? Are we preaching what the apostles taught? Are we praying in church services? That to me is a big one. I just feel like we have dropped the ball dramatically on prayer in the worship service. So we're gathering for worship, and we're hardly praying at all in many of our churches. We're just maybe a quick little blessing prayer. But rarely do you see in a lot of Baptist churches is something like a prayer of confession. That's what's part of a liturgy of the Catholic Church, part of the liturgy in the Anglican churches, and all these churches that have liturgies. There's always that prayer of confession, but we've felt like, I don't need that. We can move on. It's kind of a downer. And it's true, you get more people coming, but then we're not being reminded of our own sin and our need for forgiveness. So really prayers of all kinds, praise, thanksgiving, supplication, confession. And then, fellowship, we talked about that, family, and then the breaking of bread, of sacraments again, of coming back and taking the communion seriously, and not as something to rush through, but something really, and really having something solid there, even though we're going to lose people if we take these things seriously at first, because it's boring. It's boring stuff. Yeah. And people want the excitement, the zazz, and unfortunately it's like, look, I think we have to get back to that and then see where it goes and then kind of build from there. And I'm hoping that there'll be, one of the challenges I'm facing is where do you go from when you have Christians now, we have all these Christians who are not as invested in the church. Where do you go, at what point do you stop trying to get them interested and you just basically say, this is what it is. You need to be bored. You need to come, bring your kids, and let them be bored in the pews. That's how my parents were.
Yeah.
I wonder about that. I'll throw that out there. Do you have any comments on that? But at what point do you say, do we put that challenge out to Christians who profess to be Christians? We're not talking about secularists, but who are bored by church and feel like, I'm not going to go. At what point do we just say, we're not going to entertain you anymore? You need to be here, and put that challenge out to them?
I think maybe what you're getting at, Michael, is discipline. Like the spiritual disciplines in a sense too. That maybe boring. I don't know if I don't want church to be boring, but I do want people to understand it's not our job as those who are leading worship is not to entertain you. It's not to just keep it fun and light and entertaining. It's to lead you to true worship, which is far more enjoyable actually than so. But there is a discipline, like in anything. You mentioned the Marines, or it's not all going to be fun and games all the time. Sometimes you're going to say, I would like to sleep in today, but I'm going to get up and get the kids ready, and we're going to go to church because that's what's better for the long term. What I really want for our lives as a Christian family is the discipline of being part of a church or praying. You don't always feel like praying. You don't always feel like reading the Bible. But you discipline yourself into doing that, and there's greater fruit that comes out of that. So, and I think we've lost any sense of calling people to the disciplines of the Christian faith. Even that word discipline is like, whoa, wait, that sounds terrible. Yeah. But the idea is actually, we see it in all different fields, that there's fruit that comes out of a disciplined devotion to things. So,
yeah. All right. Yeah. Well, my last question, we've got just a few minutes left here, is this. Are you going into 2024? Looks like it's going to be an interesting year. A lot of things are going to be happening. These are years. It's an election year. It's going to be, looks like a very divisive election, and that certainly always pours over into our congregations as well. Who knows what the economy is going to look like at this point, and wars all over the world, and all sorts of things happening. A lot of unexpected things. Coming into 2024, as you look ahead, are you more concerned or more hopeful for the American church? For the American church.
As I read the Bible, I read about a minority people worshiping God and following Jesus where it's difficult and where it's dangerous even. And yet they're triumphant in the end, not because they've converted everybody or had a great life in material terms. And so I hope that our churches grow numerically. I hope that the American church has a great influence on our nation and, persuades the culture to go a different direction and so forth. But I do believe we're on the victorious side. And so I think if we are the church, if we follow the scriptures and follow Jesus, I feel very optimistic that that's going to go great for us, ultimately.
Okay, so you're more hopeful.
Yeah.
What you?
Yeah, like reading all of these dour statistics and all that notwithstanding, I'm actually more hopeful for the church in America than I've been in the past. And it's because of what we said, that there is a hunger and a thirst for discipleship and deeper faith that we haven't seen. I think as pastors, for a lot of people would testify. I would testify. You testified, as well. And so that's hopeful. Now, of course, I still would hope for peace and what's going on around the world. Hope our economy turns around, and can we still be faithful in comfort, not just in conflict and affliction. But what's happened in the church in the last 5, 10, 20 years, very hopeful, very hopeful. So. And it's more sensed than it is seen in numbers. So, yeah.
How about you, Michael?
Yeah, I think so. I think I tend to think with two minds. I have thoughts about the direction for our country as an American citizen, and then as a Christian, I think. And as an American, I'm concerned. I'm concerned for our country. I just feel like there's a lot of bad trends happening. There's a lot of terrible things going on. And I'm concerned for the youth of America. I'm hearing there's a lot of despair and desperation out there, and a lot of confusion, and a lot of corruption of our institutions that we used to trust.
Yeah.
So as an American, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. It doesn't matter who gets elected. I'd feel like I'm concerned for this country. However, as a Christian, you know, Christ says, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against her. And it's an amazing thing. It seems like when the world falls, the church seems to rise out of this. And like there's something about that. And even the stress and the anxiety of being an American, I think, will actually produce a lot of faith in the church. We've recently heard of some atheists who have converted to Christianity because they realized this world is terrifying, and the powers that are trying to destroy civilization are so great. Yeah. And only Christianity has an answer to that.
It's true.
If you look up Ayaan Hirsi Ali, her testimony, Why I'm Now a Christian, is really interesting. I think this is an opportunity for us. It's kind of like the stars shine brighter as the sky gets darker. So there's that tension in me. And so part of me is like, I'm actually encouraged because I do see the culture of American culture in declining rapidly, and it may turn a little bit, but it will give us an opportunity to really distinguish and to shine like stars in heaven. So, all right. Well, thank you, men.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Michael.
So thank our panel again, and thank you for tuning in. And we're going to pray that God will grow us together in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And God bless you, and Happy New Year. And we'll see you next time on Crossroads.